Okay, so I know you're begging for more opportunities to practice using your knowledge of conversion, obversion, and contraposition to test arguments for validity. So I will give you what you are so desperately begging for. Here we have another argument. Some insane people are illogical people. Therefore, some logical people are sane people. And you've got your magical 6 steps on the screen that are going to be your lifesaver, because following those 6 steps in order is going to allow you to determine whether or not this argument is valid or invalid, and what operation proves it valid or what fallacy proves it invalid. All right? So why don't you go ahead and pause your video, and when you're ready to check your work, restart it. All right, I'm super glad that you're actually taking the time to do this. This is such good brain exercise, and you're gonna have such a more successful time in this course because you're taking the time to do this practice with me. All right, so we've got in our argument another indicator word, a conclusion indicator, the word therefore. That tells us that the conclusion statement follows that indicator word, and what comes before it is a premise. So we can arrange this in standard form. Again, these statements are already expressed as standard form categorical statements, so that makes our life a little bit easier. But we'll arrange it so that the premise statement appears above the conclusion statement with an inference bar separating them. Whoops. And then we will identify our terms, and we've got 4 terms here. And what we really need are 2 terms that we can use with their complements in this argument. So again, it doesn't matter which pair of terms you pick, but I'm going to suggest in this case that the most sensible choice is logical people and sane people. And that's because if I chose insane people, I would have to use the term complement non-insane people when I want to refer to sane people. It just gets too convoluted. So I'm going to choose to work with L and S, logical people and sane people. When we symbolize the argument, we see we've got some non-S are non-L, therefore some L are S. And you can again see, as I indicated in an earlier lecture, when you reduce these arguments down to symbols, and boy, is this ever going to be clear as we move forward into more complicated arguments in the future, when you reduce these down to symbols, you make it so much easier to look at the form of the argument and determine what's going on. So good for you for taking the time to reduce your arguments down to symbols and always indicating what categories your individual letters refer to. All right, so now what do we have to do? We have to figure out, well, what's the difference between the premise and the conclusion? And one of the differences we see is that the subject and the predicate have switched positions in the conclusion statement. So we have S and S appearing as the subject of the premise statement, but S is down here as the predicate of the conclusion. So the subject and predicate are in switched positions, and both the subject and the predicates are term complements of one another. So we have non-S and S and non-L and L. And so then the question is, what operation could I apply to the statement some non-S are non-L to produce the statement some L are S? Conversion? Obversion? No. Contraposition? Yeah. All right. So now we know contraposition is at work here. And so the next question is this premise statement the kind of statement that contraposition can be applied to? No. Contraposition can be applied only to A claims and O claims and have the resulting statements have the same truth value as the originals. But when we try to apply contraposition to I statements or E statements, which and the premise here and the conclusion are both I statements, what we end up producing are statements that have an undetermined truth value. Now what that means here is this. If we assume this premise statement is true and we contrapose it to produce this conclusion statement, when we assume the premise statement is true, we won't know if this conclusion statement is true or false. It could be false. And remember our definition of validity. In an invalid argument, it's possible that the conclusion could be false even when we assume the premise is true. And if the truth value of the conclusion statement here is undetermined, that means it's possible it could be false. And that tells us this is an invalid argument. I almost made up a new word there. An invalid argument, and it's invalid by illicit contraposition.